One of the other functions that SolidWorks can do, in addition to making parts, is to make assemblies. Now, an assembly is just a collection of parts that are put together into a file. And what I want you to do is to actually put your 4 parts of your slider assembly together into an assembly so you can see it in SolidWorks and actually make it rotate. So what I want to do is just kind of go through the process of getting a collection of parts put together in an assembly in SolidWorks so you can do it. So for this, what I would recommend that you do is open up all 4 parts in SolidWorks. That's usually the best way to go. It just usually makes it a little bit easier for you. In this case, I've got my wheel, I've got my retainer, I've got my block, I've got my arm here too. Now, when we're dealing with assemblies, we do need to kind of think ahead with certain things. And the main thing is that how are those parts going to be put together? How are they going to be constrained together? We're going to put in basically constraints like we did before, or relationships, but they're not going to be called relationships. They're going to be called mates. And let me show you how to do this. Well, there's many ways to create a part or create an assembly in SolidWorks. One would be File, New, and if you click on New, then it says a new assembly. You can click on that. That's one way to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a different way to start an assembly, which is sometimes a little bit faster. Now, the first thing that you want to know is when you make an assembly, the first part that you kind of put into your assembly is kind of the anchor part. It's kind of the thing that's not going to move. It's not going to be able to be manipulated much. So in this case, that's going to be my block. That's going to be kind of the anchor part. So I'm going to select my block part. And then I'm going to go up to the SolidWorks menu and go to File. And then it's going to say Make Assembly from Parts. So that's how I'm going to start. Now, when I do this, it's going to ask me to make an assembly. I can say OK. You may or may not get this screen, or it may come up right to the assembly part here. In this case, I have now an assembly screen, and I'm going to just maximize this so we can see it a little bit better. Now, if we take a look here, it is asking to select a component to insert or say OK. So in this case, I have my block final that I want to put in there, and I'm going to just say OK. And that is going to put my block part in my assembly, and it's going to locate it at the origin, and it's going to be fixed. And if we look into our feature manager over here, which is for our assembly now, it has this little F, and that F means it's fixed. We can't move it in the assembly, but we really don't want to, so that's a good thing right now. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to put in the next part. And in this case, we could put any part in, but I'm going to kind of logically build through this, and we're going to see that we have our next one is going to be the wheel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the top and say Insert Components, and I'm going to select my wheel. And now if I see my wheel, now if I come over to the screen, you can kind of see that I have the wheel. I can move it around, and I can really put it anywhere. And in this case, it doesn't really matter where I put it, other than I want to put it on the screen somewhere close to my part, just so that it's easy to select and rotate around. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to click and release, and it's going to drop that part down. Now if I rotate this around, you can see that there's 2 parts in space. Now I want to mate this into my block in the proper manner. So now when we think of mating this together, there's it takes a little bit of practice to really get good at it, but I'm going to show you the basics and kind of how to do this. So in this case, we're going to apply mate. So we're going to come up to the mate tab up at the top, or mate selection, click on mate. It's going to come up with basically a box that's very similar to add relationships. Now it says mate selection. So this is going to be mated into our block by this outer surface right here. So I'm going to select that surface. That's going to be coincident to this inside surface. So I'm going to say that inside surface. And it's going to be concentric. So now if we take a look at it, you can kind of see they're lined up right on top of each other there. And that's good. That's what I want. So I'm going to say OK to that. And then it's going to basically say, okay, what's your next mate? Well, I want to put the next mate in. So this is too far down. I want it to be up. So this bottom surface here is going to be mated up with this inside surface. So there, and you can kind of see it moved it around already, and it's going to be coincident. So I'm going to say OK. And in this case, those are two relationships that I wanted to add, but this part isn't fully constrained, but that's okay. That's what I wanted to have. So I'm going to just say okay here. And one of the things that I'm going to see is that you can see that this hole here, if I click and grab on this part, I can actually rotate it around. It is free to rotate, but it's constrained so it can't move up and down or outside of that block. So that's what I really wanted. So that was my first part. So let's add in our second part. So our second part is going to be, let's see, I didn't want mate. I wanted to insert component. I'm going to put in our arm. So our arm, I've got our arm. I'm bringing that over here. And I am going to put this into our assembly. So how am I going to do this? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is look at the bottom of this arm. So I'm going to click on mate. The bottom of this arm, oops, I clicked on an edge. So I'm going to highlight that edge, hit delete on my keyboard, and I want to get this bottom surface. So it says face. That's what I want. That face is going to basically ride right on the top of our block. So I'm going to click on that. So it'll be lined up. Now I can say okay. Now I want to put this arm, that little nub that was on that arm, in this hole. Well, it's over my part. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to exit out of the mate here. And I'm going to grab this part and I'm just going to drag it. So now I've dragged it over there. Now I can see that a little bit better. Now I want to put this nub in that hole. So I'm going to say mate again. It had that face selected, so I don't want that. So I'm going to highlight it, delete that off. Now I'm going to select this face or that cylindrical surface. And then I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to click on this inside surface there. And it says concentric. And that's what I want. So I'm going to say okay. Again, I want to then align this piece into my slot over here. And the way I'm going to do that is I need to move my part just so I can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to say okay. And I'm going to grab this and I'm going to slide it out. You can kind of see now I can see that a little bit better. Well, there's a couple of different ways that we can do things now. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky and you need a little bit of practice to do this. But this end of the arm is going to slide in this slot. And when I made the block here, so if I come up to the block and I look at my front plane, I made my front plane right in the middle of that slot. I did that very purposely because I wanted to make that plane be able to be used to help define where that piece is going to slide in there. Now the next thing that I need to do is actually have an axis geometry in this part. And that is the one thing that I don't have on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my arm and I'm going to show you how to add in an axis, a reference geometry. So in here, what I want to do is on this piece of this feature, I want to add a reference axis. So I'm going to come up here, say File, Insert, Reference Geometry, Axis. And once I do that, click on Axis, and it's going to say, what do I want to put an axis on? Well, I want to put an axis on that cylindrical surface. Well, if I select it, it says, okay, you want the axis of that cylinder. And I said, yep, that's what I want. So I'm going to say, okay. It's going to put that axis in there. Now, what I really want to do is save this part out, do a File, Save, and now I'll have the part. And then I can go back over to, and I'm not going to save it out right now, but if I come back over to my window and go to my assembly, it's going to say, SolidWorks is going to say, hey, your part has changed. Do you want to update your parts? And I'm going to say, or rebuild the assembly. I'm going to say, yes, I want to rebuild that. and it's added in this axis. Although I don't see it here, it should be there. And we're going to add a mate. So we're going to add a mate. Now again, I want to pick the front plane of our block. Well, I can't really find the front plane of the block here, so I'm going to click over on this little drop down. This has got the full assembly, and that gives me my feature tree essentially for all of our parts. So now you can see that I've got the block. I want to pick that front plane. I can select on it. Now it picks the front plane there. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to minimize that, and now I'm going to go to my arm. Now if I click on my arm, if I look all the way down at the bottom here, it has the axis that we just put in there. So I'm going to click on that axis. You can see it rotates that arm around and puts it right there, and it is coincident, and that's what I want. So then I can say OK. Now I'm done with that. Now I'm going to add one more part, which is our retainer. So our retainer final, I can come over. You can see it on the screen. Now what I'm going to do is start to mate that in there. You can see it's not in the right orientation, and that is okay because when I add my mates, it's going to snap to the right orientation. So first thing I'm going to do is go in here, add a mate, and this little shelf or that little stop, that face right here, and I'm going to zoom in to make sure I get the face. That face is going to sit right on the top of this part, so I'm going to click on, I want to make sure I get that face right there. So now I've got the face. Now I can say OK. And now I'm going to rotate this around. Now it's going to fit in here. I'm going to put this face, make sure I get that face. And that face is going to fit into the part right in here. So I'm going to make that mesh up with that part right there. So that kind of lined up. That's good. And now I'm going to say OK. Now I need to get it fit in the right location. So this face is going to match up to, let me zoom out and select this face. And with that, I have say OK. Now I've got my part in there. And now if we take a look at it, you can kind of see if we zoom in here that there is some clearance. Things kind of fit in there. And the fun part about this is that now what we can see is if I hit escape, I'm going to deselect out of the mate. If I grab this part, I can actually rotate it around, and you can actually see it rotate in there. And if I flip this over, I can do the same thing. I can kind of see this rotate around inside of our part. So that is an assembly. That's what I want you to do. Create this assembly. Once you have this assembly, do a file, save it as an assembly. Then you can keep that. Make sure you put this in the same directory as you have your other parts. And what I want you to do, show this assembly to me, show that it rotates and that it looks good, and I can get you checked off. So that is how you create a simple assembly using insert components and our mates. If you have any questions, please let me know.